13 most asked questions during any Facebook interview is actually the result of a research that I made a few weeks ago. And truth be said, here Facebook publishes on their website the most commonly asked behavioral questions during the interviews. However, because of the fact that I found there is some overlap between mine questions and theirs, I believe it's still worthwhile talking about what I found, because I will also give you some hopefully useful tips and tricks on how to answer these questions. So without further ado, let's just get to the questions. And on number 13, we have, tell me about the time when you were not able to meet a time commitment and what prevented you from meeting it. What was the outcome and what did you learn from it? Now, of course, this has many variations, but this is basically the failure to meet a time commitment. And the first thing you should understand about this question is that it's a negative one, right? With negative questions, there are probably two essential things to keep in mind. First of all, you should have a genuine story. You should have a genuine situation where you actually failed to meet the time commitment. It should be something significant, and more often than not, you'll spot this if you're successfully able to quantify that failure, actually. The second important thing here is that in any failure story, the most relevant part of the story is the learnings. That is, if you take the STAR format, or rather the SAR format without the task, the results should be the learnings from this. Now, also, of course, whenever applying for a company such as Facebook, Amazon, Google, or these large companies, they rather prefer to talk about experience in a team context rather than on a solo project. Why is this? Well, basically because the definition of behavioral interview is that they look at your past experiences, to predict your future performance on the job. And if you had past experiences in a team context, that's a better predictor of your future performance. Now, this being said, if you have an exceptional one in a solo project, then you should probably go ahead with it. What else should be interesting to mention here with respect to not being able to meet the time commitment? Own your mistake. So needless to say here, but don't put the blame on someone else for not meeting the mistake. Probably examples that would say that you failed to meet the time commitment because of an outside event are weaker stories than failure to meet the time commitment because it was actually your fault. In the learning section, probably you'd want to talk about how you could have spotted this much sooner by probably looking better into the requirements or probably listening and communicating better with other stakeholders in the project. All right, next question. Let's say you're working on a major project and you're in the weeds. How do you find your way out? So why would they ask you such a question in the first place? Because they want to see your problem-solving skills, and not just that, but they want to see your interpersonal skills. So, as I mentioned in the other example, they would prefer you to talk about this in a team context. So, if you're working on a major project, more often than not, there are more people involved. So, how would you find your way out here? And actually, this is the relevant part, besides the fact that it should be, of course, a relevant example. Well, first of all, you do this by acknowledging that sometimes you cannot always be the subject matter expert and calling in for help. So acknowledging this, it's something that is regarded very well by HR people, because more often than not, people don't like, they just like to focus straight into that thing and only try to fix it all by themselves, when in real life situations that's not always feasible. So what else could be relevant here? Of course, depending on your example, you might have spotted something interesting, you might have reviewed additional documentation, but usually if you call in for help, or if you scheduled the meeting, or if you transform this into a team effort, this actually will showcase you as a great team player, and more often than not, it's easier to resolve these types of situations in a team environment. So this would be my recommendation, of course, but this being said, if you have an exceptional example where you solve something as an individual contributor, you should probably go ahead with that example. Next, give me an example of a time you faced conflict while working on a team. How did you handle that? Now, everyone, you know, from my coaching experience, everyone said, of course, we all have conflicts, and in my 20 years of experience, it's impossible not to have had a conflict on my team. So let's just let me think of a proper one. And then they stay and they think for maybe 30 minutes or so, and they come up with a really poor example. First of all, why would that example be poor? That example might be poor more often than not because you say, I had a conflict on my team, but it was basically someone else who was to blame here. So it was he said, she said type of thing. So if you ever talk about conflicts and stuff like that, take ownership. It's much better to take ownership than talk about a conflict in which you had nothing to do, you were bringing in by accident. Because this is how you release you fail to take responsibility of the situation, and basically your answer cannot be strong here. If you didn't own this conflict, it wasn't your stuff. Why are you talking about someone else's experience going in an interview when you're actually being interviewed? So these type of conflicts, the other important part here would be how you diffuse this conflict. And how you diffuse this conflict is more often than not by scheduling a one-on-one with that person or in a group, but never by sending an email, hey, I'm sorry. You know, it doesn't work this way. So that's why, you know, again, we are talking in a team environment, in a corporate environment where you should be able to make a distinction between a cold communication method such as email or messengers or digital way and a warmer one that is a face-to-face meeting. Yeah, so this is basically how you would start this. Then depending on the situation, you would branch out into different scenarios. Maybe you would really there are endless possibilities here. It's just that I gave you the direction here, so you hopefully have enough insight to build a strong case here. Tell me about them when you work with a difficult team member. So this is slightly different of a time when you faced a conflict while working on a team, and basically the reason why they would want to someone would ask you these questions because they want to evaluate your interpersonal skills and how well can you cooperate with people. And this is often, well, I mean, this is you cannot see this when people get along each other well. You can always see this while cooperating with rather difficult team members. And for example, from my own experience, when I was involved in an HR B2B software, I was the technical lead, and my business partner was in charge of selling the software. And he actually had much to say in the interface design of that software because he was actually the interface with our clients, and those clients were very picky. Their choice, of course, that they're right, rightfully so. And I actually learned that you know, instead of whenever I had a prototype ready for him to present it to him, to rather send it again to developers to make another extra round of meetings with my development teams to make it look as much as possible as a finished product before presenting it to my business partner, because otherwise, because of the fact that we had often different ways of thinking about these things, I should better present them with a finished product as to a draft. And this is how I actually managed to diffuse many to actually prevent many tense situations. So this is actually how I speed up things in our case. So this is how I go about working with a difficult team member. Next, tell me about the time when you recovered from a difficult situation. Again, here I would go with a team example, and basically, ideally, you should think of a situation where in order to recover, you had to call in for external help. Where you acknowledge that you cannot always be the subject matter expertise. You cannot always have an answer to any question. So by calling in for help, you actually maximize your chances of resolving that problem. And in terms of HR, you show your interpersonal skills and your problem solving skills, and you basically score points for in the behavioral part of the interview. So if you manage to find a situation in which you addressed this, you couldn't really get out of a situation, and you called in for help, you set up a meeting, you set up discussions, and you successfully managed to get through that, then basically you have a great example. Try to also quantify the outcome, and it will be even better. Next question. Tell me about the time when you came up with a new approach to a problem. Basically, this is a pitch to ask you for a time you invented or simplified something, and more often than not, recent examples are better than older ones. So of course you should prepare this one in advance. I'm sure you have some interesting inventions that you came up with. It doesn't really have to be that much of an invention as much as an elegant solution to a problem. But of course, inventions are always better regarded within this sense. It should be quantifiable. You should be able to quantify the results. Why was that? Why was your approach useful? So what did the company had to win? What did your team had to win from this? And yes, this is basically it. So next question, what's your strength and what's your weakness? This is another one. First, about your strengths. Whenever going into an interview, you should focus on your strengths, needless to say. But more often than not, people do not really know what's their core strength. I know this again from my coaching experience. I know that some people prefer to answer what's my strength with giving 3 examples of more about what's their strength, and which is fine as an example. But just think about what's your main strength, what's your core strength, what's that one thing that you do best, and furthermore, think about a situation where you exhibited that strength, where that strength made the difference, right? So think about a situation, an action, and the result from that strength that would, of course, advertise you, put you in the best possible spot. Then with the weakness, and here it tends to be quite problematic for many people, and why it tends to be problematic talking about weaknesses. Well, of course, no one wants to talk about weaknesses, like no one enjoys talking about failures, but the most common mistake when talking of a weakness is to turn a positive into a negative. That is, I pay too much attention to detail. I mean, come on, how can you apply at a company such as Facebook and not pay attention to detail? And it should go without saying. So this is what we call turning a positive into a negative. So it's a terrible example. Don't use these things. What are some good examples? Listen, at Facebook there are some individual contributors tracks, that is the highly technical and just technical tracks, and there are the so-called the management tracks, into which it's a blend between technical interviewing and behavioral interviewing. So for the individual contributors, for the on-site, there's out of the 5 interviews, only 1 is behavioral. For the management tracks, it tends to be more 2.5, so it's 50-50 between the behavioral and the technical one. So now in terms of going back to the weakness, for an individual contributor, more often than not, you're technical guys, so you don't have sales experience. So you could use probably sales experience as your main asset, as a weakness. Of course, in a context where you very much enjoy pitching new ideas to management and all that stuff, but still you have never worked in a front-facing sales role, so you're not a salesperson. The other probably the most commonly one used by technical people is that they do not enjoy very much public speaking. That is, speaking front of large crowds of unknown people, and probably half of candidates talking about this mentioned Toastmasters as an improvement method. Not a very efficient one from my experience, but still. Public speaking could be one, but it's a very generic one, and I would suspect that people got bored about this one, but still a valid one. Many people are introverts, and you would pitch it in a way that early in my career I noticed that I had troubles, starting conversation ever since I tried to improve, and I tried to, have that, make that first, take the initiative whenever I had to, instead of waiting for the others to happen. Now, for the more management roles, you could go with deep technical expertise as a relative weakness, and you would pitch in such a way that, hey, whenever I had something truly technical, I always make sure that I have my team of experts that I would call in and learn how to get these solved. And of course, also for the management part, there could be sales. Very often that people don't have time to work in sales when applying for these types of roles, especially technology roles at Facebook. So this could work as well. So remember one thing, just whenever you're pitching these things, both strengths and weaknesses, to have a story that would highlight this. So to have a pitch there. It doesn't, being it in a star format, let's say it's less relevant for the weakness part. But still, so long as it makes sense, so long as it's quantifiable, I would say you should be fine here. So let's move on. Tell me about the time when you took the lead on a difficult project. Why would they ask you this question in the first place? The reason why someone would ask you this question is because they want to see how you take ownership, or if you take ownership. Because what happens, some candidates prefer to say, I was assigned on this project despite the fact that I didn't have time to do it. Now, I will read again the question. Tell me about the time when you took the lead on a difficult project, right? So this actually begs for an answer that you actually led the project. You were a leader in the project. You were not a follower. You didn't follow your boss with their orders. You didn't disagree and commit with them. But you took the lead on a difficult project. And this is basically the most common pitfall with these types of questions. Then, of course, make sure you answer how many people were working, what was the goal of the project, how you led the project, and it should, of course, be a successful project, because why would you go with the negative? Why would you take the lead on a project that failed? I mean, why would you advertise in a job interview? So, yes, these would be the main things. Now, let me also give you another piece of advice here. So, when being asked a behavior question, the interviewer might be looking for one or more of the following three things. The first one is, are you someone that they'd enjoy working with in their team? Think about it. Could you do something more, maybe, to look like you, to score more points on this one? The second one, are you someone that has the necessary toughness to get the job done? Because unless you don't know, working in teams of high performance can be super challenging at times, because difference of opinion, are maybe the lightest form of conflict in those teams. And you could be an extraordinary person, but if you don't know how to get out of these tense situations, you will always basically have to follow everyone else, and your ideas will never get implemented unless you know how to sell them, unless you know that there isn't necessarily, I'm not talking about politics here, but still about leadership. So you should be able to lead. And so this would be whether you have the toughness. The second reason. The third reason is whether you're someone that's really interested in the job. Because, of course, there are many candidates who apply for maybe 5 opportunities at once. And if you're going into, let's say, an on-site interview every other day, I'm not sure you'll be able to perform as well as someone that applies at one job every 2 months or every 5 years. So if someone, in simple words, if someone prepared only for the Facebook interview for the past 2 months, and you've been preparing for 5 job interviews for the past 2 months, and you have them in consecutive days, the difference in performance will play a role here actually. So be careful with these things. Whether you show them that you really, tell them that you really want the job. I mean, it's not unheard of. Like, as odd as it might seem, telling them that you really want the job might actually do you a lot of good if you say it in the right circumstances. You feel like they don't believe you that you really want the job. By saying it, you will actually emphasize on it. And actually, it's not me who advises these things. I just also heard this advice, I think, from Susie Welch, or I cannot remember her name. She's quite famous on CNBC, and she does the HR videos. I put a link to her materials in the video description. So these are the 3 things that they are looking, they are scanning. One of these 3 things will be scanned in each and every answer that you give. So this could be actually a good time to think about these when answering. Tell me about the time when you took the lead on a difficult project. Right, number 5 most asked question in any job interview at Facebook is, we all deal with difficult customers from time to time. Tell me about the challenging client-facing situation and how you handled it. Now you might think, hey, how is it possible for me to have a client if I'm applying for a technical role at Facebook? And we all have clients, and we all have primary clients, and we all have secondary ones. And if you don't know what a primary client is, that's the one you are actually working for, your stakeholder, the one if you're a developer, probably your client would be your project manager. In other words, as compared to the user of Facebook, right? So the user, the Facebook user, would be an indirect client, a secondary, tertiary client. Your first client, your main client is actually the one that, with the person with whom you're interacting with. Now, something else that's interesting with difficult customers from time to time, you see, it basically wants to see on whether you were challenged to work with a difficult customer, and the best possible answers are the answers where you did what's best for the company or for the goal, for the higher purpose of the company. This is the reference that you must take here. So whether you disagreed or you agreed with the customer is a secondary thing, but you must have followed the vision and the mission of the company. This is the main thing here. Of course, how you negotiated with that customer is important, and this varies by situation. And it would be premature for me to talk about these things because I don't know there can be so many scenarios. But it's very important that you talk about the higher purpose of the company. You should be someone that's motivated by these things, and you should genuinely believe in the core values. And yes, in the mission statement of the company, or you should show that you are the type who gets excited of solving challenging problems, right? And of course, in the best interest of the company. All right, number 4. Everyone starts somewhere. Talk about the time when you were new on the job and had a lot to learn. How did you manage that? yeah, so basically it talks about whenever you had to get started in a new role, it's only normal that you have to make it a learning experience for the most part. How you do this? Well, you do this by being curious. So long as you show curiosity throughout the process, and don't just use the company intranet, in this case Facebook, to to say, hey, I'm here, whomever wants to contact me, please go ahead. You should go out, talk to people, get out of your comfort zone if you're an introvert, and try to accumulate as much information as possible. The interpersonal skills are also something that you should be really, really paying a lot of attention to here. Of course, if you can add some spice with some mistakes, probably not the biggest ones, but try to make it an interesting experience. Try to think of the following question: are you someone they enjoy working with? Try to answer this question. Try to score points here, because I believe this is the best context that I can give you. This is the best type of help that I can give you here. Number 3, tell me about the situation where you had to solve a difficult problem. So needless to say, this is about your problem solving skills. We previously touched upon this one somewhat. So whenever you deal with something difficult, basically you have to assess the situation, and if it's something really difficult, it's only human, that we cannot solve these things all the time by ourselves. So you could probably also make it a group challenge. So you could also schedule meetings, call in some experts, and see what could be done. But also besides these problem solving skills, you should also emphasize on actually delivering the results, despite the fact that the problem was very difficult. So I'm saying this in a context where you shouldn't make it an example where you talk all the time about how you resolve how you worked on resolving the problem, but you should put in a star format with quantifiable results. So make it a quantifiable example here, and it's of course depending from role to role what type of problem you solve. But once you find the best example, make sure it's in a star format, so they can properly evaluate and you can properly score points on this one. The second most asked question at Facebook: tell me about a team project that you worked on. Actually, this is a unique opportunity for you to self-advertise, because it's a synonym to what's the most successful project you've ever worked on, assuming of course it was in a team context, which is always, as I said multiple times throughout this video, team projects are preferred. This, I believe, is part of the preparation of another question: tell me about yourself, which you'd answer by talking about the main highlights in your career, which should be again projects, 1 or 2 projects. Basically, one of those highlights in your career should be this example of the team project that you worked on. Needless to say, it should be in a star format, should be quantifiable, it should focus on your strengths, and you should say it with energy, send positivity. Interpersonal skills, maybe show curiosity if it is also the case, and all that stuff. But really, try to keep it within 2 minutes if you can, or maybe even 1.5 minutes would be ideal, because shorter answers are better ones, so long as they fit into the star format and are really quantifiable. So this is how you'd probably go with these things, and don't be surprised if this takes you half a day to come up with, to tune up this sole answer, because more often than not these things are hard in the beginning, but get easier as you move on. And the most asked question by far in Facebook interviews is why Facebook, and actually I'm going to do another video for this. simply because I find that the question is too important not to miss, and I want to give you some good and some bad examples here in order to help you to prepare a strong answer for this one, because it's honestly, it's like it's almost as the other 12 combined. So there you go. These are the 13 most asked questions during any Facebook interview. As you see, there is some overlap between what Facebook publishes on their website and what I'm saying here. But hopefully, I gave you some interesting insight here. And please, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to hear from you. And as always, I hope you found my content interesting, and thank you very much for watching.